Chapter 3. Jewboy. There are times in our early life that have an outsized impact for the rest of our days. It may have been 30 years ago, but our biases or food preferences or even physical mannerisms originated there. That period of time could be as short as the week you went to camp when you were 10. When you left, you were impacted, influenced. Maybe you made a lifelong friend, or you developed a pathological fear of raccoons. Perhaps you learned to swim in open water, and at week's end you left brimming with confidence. Or you almost drowned, and to this day have nightmares about lungs full of water. A lot can happen in a week, but the segments of influence can also be longer, months or maybe years. Beginning when I was 8 years old, there was a very specific 4 years that affected me in a myriad of ways. And they began when my mother uttered this sentence: "Marty and I got married while you were away this summer." That's how I found out I had a stepdad. Though at age 8, the closest description of him that I could formulate was, "Man who will live with us and act like my dad even though I already have a dad." This marriage happened in August of 1962, while Karen and I had been at our grandparents' house in Martins Ferry. We were cautiously excited. Mom had been dating Marty for some months, and he would bring trinkets and other small gifts when he came to visit. He was dark-haired and looked like Dean Martin. "Are we going to be moving?" "Yes." "Will we be going to a different school?" "Yes." "Where will we be moving?" "Why do you bombard me with so many questions?" A few days after the announcement, Mom instructed us to put on our good church clothes, since we were going to meet Marty's parents. Marty picked us up and we all drove to their house. Though their home was an ordinary one-story ranch house, when I stepped through the front door, I found myself in a strange world. One of a tight-knit clan of people, most of whom spoke a different language, who ate exotic foods and had thousands of years of custom, ritual, and strict religious observance governing their everyday lives. Enter the Jews. Marty stood us in front of two ancient people in matching recliners. "Drew, Karen, these are my parents, your new grandparents, Rose and A.J. Melman. You can call your grandmother Bubby and your grandfather Zadie. That's their Yiddish names." "Hello," we mumbled in unison. Then Karen moved over behind our mom. I listened while the adults talked. Marty's parents had accents, and they looked perpetually worried. He later told me that they came from Russia. Occasionally, Marty and his parents would start arguing in another language, which I later found out was both Hebrew and Yiddish. This language was not like anything I heard in the movies, like French or Spanish, and a lot of the words seemed like they were trying to clear phlegm from their throat. What had Mom gotten us into? The arguing got worse, and I tried to sound out and write down a few of the recurring words. That night, I asked Marty their definitions. Mashugana. Marty said this meant a crazy person. His mom and dad had used this word numerous times during our visit. Shiksa. This was a word I'd heard used a few times. Marty told me that it meant a non-Jewish woman, but the way his mom was using it sounded like it was Hebrew for, "Marty, what have you done to us?" Shagus, which I was told meant a non-Jewish male. I wrote it down as loosely meaning son of a shiksa. The next day, I asked my mother why the Melmans spoke another language. "Marty and his family are Jewish." "What's Jewish?" "It's just a different religion than ours. They're Jewish, and we're Episcopalian." I didn't give it much more thought. I just assumed we still had the same God, the same Jesus, and that my earthly record would now be transferred to this new Jewish church. It was easy to be impressed by my new stepfather. Marty was good-looking, wore sharkskin suits, and always seemed tanned. He could let a lit cigarette hang from one side of his mouth and talk normally, without the ash ever falling off, his left eye squinting to keep the smoke out while his right eye looked right at you. When his cigarette wasn't in his mouth, he held it so naturally it seemed like a sixth finger. He wore jewelry, gold rings, necklaces, and cufflinks. I'd never seen that stuff on men before. In contrast, Grandpa Hastings might wear a Masonic button on his suit for special occasion. Marty quickly started letting me tag along as he attended to his businesses. He owned a used car lot near downtown Columbus with a neon sign announcing, "Marty's Used Cars." I was thoroughly impressed that he had his name on a big lit sign. The lot had an office with a desk and a back room full of junk where an old black man worked on tires and cleaned up the 10 or 15 cars that sat in the lot under the long string of flashing bulbs. Marty would tell the old man to rearrange the cars, moving some to the front row and some to the rear. He'd look to see who had come in to make their weekly payment on the car they'd financed. Periodically, he'd pull a large wad of money out of his pocket, sometimes giving some to someone who came in or taking money from someone else. A lot of being in business seemed to be about the wad of money that went in and out of his pocket. This was the first habit I picked up from Marty. For the rest of my life, I would always carry a large wad of cash in my front pocket. Marty also owned a jazz place, the 502 Club, which attracted the top jazz musicians from across the United States. I'd sip a Coke at the bar while Marty counted money at the registers, looked over liquor supplies, and pulled out his wad of cash to deal with whoever he was talking to, which was mostly black dudes who wore sunglasses at night, like Marty. I not only thought Marty was rich, I figured he had to be famous too, since all the ads for his club bore his name. Marty Melman's 502 Club is proud to present Little Stevie Wonder, America's harmonica genius. Even if I still missed my father and wondered why I didn't hear from him, Marty Melman, for better or worse, made him slightly easier to forget. Curious as I was about the whole Jewish thing, nothing prepared me for the first time that I walked into Marty's church, a Gudisachim synagogue, on the corner of Broad and Roosevelt in the heart of Columbia's Jewish community. Marty put something called a yarmulke, a little beanie-type hat, on my head as we walked in. Everywhere were men in pews, many of them with beards. They were rocking back and forth like crazy people, except that these men were praying. Marty said it was called davening. All of them wore prayer shawls and prayed aloud in Hebrew. These prayers sounded so mournful, seemed less like praying and more like wailing. This was the first time I ever had the feeling of other, that people were not essentially all the same, that all old people were not just variations of my grandparents, and that churches were not basically all the same. I was different from these people, and that, in turn, introduced the concept of acceptance and rejection. These Jews were from the tribe of Judah, and I was descended from the tribe of Episcopalia. Marty's family also had a completely foreign dynamic. They all loved to talk loudly. They were argumentative. They debated. They were excitable. Everyone seemed to have an opinion, and everybody seemed to involve themselves in everyone else's business. They waved their hands around when they spoke, which made them seem like they were upset about something, even if they weren't. A sharp contrast from the understated wasp way of my mom and her side of the family. With my mother, you spoke when spoken to, and what was not said often ruled my life. Usually just a withering glance from my mother was communication enough in our household. And these Jewish people seemed so physical, kissing, hugging, or worse, pinching your cheeks with both of their hands. My sister and I were not used to these exaggerated displays of affection. Nothing, though, contrasted our families more than food. Mostly delicious and sometimes beyond gross. Jewish food was heavy. It often smelled weird. Boiled cabbage, beef tongue, corned beef, creamed herring, borscht. It was at every gathering, in great quantities, and usually being forced on me. "Eat! You look like a toothpick. Eat!" some new relative or family friend would exclaim. They set out so much food, it didn't look like a meal so much as a dare. The first Christmas, after our Jewish immersion, Grandma and Grandpa Hastings drove over from Martin's Ferry to pick us up for a week-long visit, and they met Marty for the first time. I'm sure that to my grandfather, who was very protective of Karen and me, the sight of Marty peering over lowered sunglasses and a cigarette in one hand and a drink in the other was a shock. "So, it's probably been hectic since your mom and Marty got married and moving to the new house, yes?" asked my granddad from the driver's seat. "Yeah, I've been going with Marty around to his businesses and helping him. He has 3 different places," I shared, excited about all the things going on. "They don't have Jesus in their church," my sister announced from her seat next to me. There was a noticeable silence, and my grandparents looked at each other. "Well, I'm sure it will be fine," my granddad said, but the ride was quieter than usual. Marty was the antithesis of the small-town pious life that my grandparents embodied. It must have been a crushing blow, and slowly but surely we would start growing apart. In the spring of '63, I discovered the Jewish Center, a cultural center that young people attended after school, kind of like a Jewish YMCA. They taught us Hebrew, history, and Judaic studies. My new cousins, Harley and Ronnie, went there, and I saw this as the fast track to acceptance. These were the go-go years for American Jews. Israel had just been founded less than 20 years before, and I wanted to be in on the ground floor. Well, as much as a 9-year-old Gentile could be. My mother seemed unsure. "Do you think this will go over with your parents?" my mom asked Marty. He picked up the phone because Marty seldom did anything without conferring with his mother. "Hey, Mom, what do you think about Drew getting enrolled in the Jewish Center?" Marty listened to his mother on the phone for a long time. "What do you mean, what's the point? He wants to learn Hebrew. Get involved." They seemed to bicker for a while before Marty hung up. My mom looked at him. That went over like I thought it would. Regardless, Marty enrolled me in the center, and I started attending after my elementary school let out. "Did you know that Theodore Herzl was the father of Zionism and founded the State of Israel?" I announced to my mom and Marty the following month. "Im tirtzu ein so agada" translates to, "If you will it, it is not a dream." That's a quote by Herzl in reference to his vision for creating a Jewish state. I had bought into the whole Jewish thing lock, stock, and barrel. I wrote that quote down in my notebook alongside all the ones from my grandfather. I figured if Herzl could create an entire Jewish nation out of desert, I could create a Jew out of a skinny Gentile. The phone rang one Sunday evening. "Drew, Karen, your grandparents are on the phone," my mom called out. We squealed. We hadn't talked to them since Christmas and had so much to tell them. "Happy Easter, kids," Grandma and Grandpa said in unison over the line. Karen spoke to them first. She didn't share my enthusiasm for the whole Jewish experience, so seldom spoke of it. I took the phone. "Guess what? Last week it was Passover. In Hebrew, it's called Pesach. Anyway, we smeared blood on our front door and waited for the angel of death to come by." They asked if we celebrated Easter that weekend also. Mom got us Easter baskets, but we didn't go to our regular church. We haven't been going there lately. My grandparents seemed disappointed with that news, but changed the subject. We talked a bit more and made plans to go see them when school was out in June. "Have you seen Dad or talked to him?" I asked at the end of our call. Why, he was just here a while back and said he misses you and loves you very much. Marty often took me around to various businesses belonging to his numerous relatives around town. They all seemed to know each other from way back. Drew, this is Mr. Schottenstein. My parents knew him back in Minsk. This is Mrs. Goldfarb. My parents knew her back in Russia. It seemed like we were related to all of them. Not just the Melmans, but also the Greens, the Schottensteins, the Finks. With these Jews, it was like you were related to millions of people. It was impossible to imagine my stepfather separate from his family. Marty was never just Marty. His family and his Jewishness were completely intertwined in his life, and my mom, sister, and I were engulfed by it. I don't think my mom realized she wasn't just marrying Marty Melman. She was marrying all the Melmans and the whole Jewish thing. Marty and I became closer. Always be a sharp dresser, he said, adjusting his tie in the mirror. Like my grandfather, Marty had his own quotes for a living, and I wrote them all down in my notebook. His were not biblical quotes, though. Marty's were either fashion or image related. Don't sit like that. People will think you're a sissy, he'd tell me when I sat in a chair with my legs crossed like David Niven did in the movies. American men sit like this, he demonstrated, his ankle resting on one leg and his knee pointing out to the side. It looked clumsy to me, but I did not want to look like a sissy, so I wrote it down. One Saturday morning, we were in the 502 Club. The place was empty as Marty inventoried liquor bottles. Never let a Schwarze run a bar tab over $10, he said as he was counting. A Schwarze was Hebrew or Yiddish slang for a black person, in the same way that Goyim referred to non-Jews. Why not? I asked as I wrote down his advice. Because if it's small enough amount that it's manageable, they'll come up with money to pay it off. If the tab gets too big, then they'll figure they'll never be able to pay it off, so they just disappear and start drinking somewhere else. I have a quote in my notebook that says, "Don't throw good money after bad." Is that like the same thing? I asked. Yeah, kind of like that, Marty said. Contradictions arose. One day at my elementary school, we had show and tell. I brought in a menorah and yarmulke and talked about Jewish customs. For the rest of the school year, some of the kids called me Jewboy. I laughed it off like I didn't care, but I did, and wished I'd never brought that stuff to school. My Judaism was finally being recognized, but by all the wrong people. That year at Christmas in Martins Ferry, our grandparents spoiled us with too many presents, and in the evenings we'd pile into our grandparents' car, driving around Belmont County, looking at all the houses decorated with lights, oohing and aahing. It was perfect, until I opened my big mouth, trying to make conversation. Marty says there is no Jesus, and they don't believe in him, I announced at the dinner table. Grandpa Hastings, already naturally watery eyes, got a little more watery. Well, that's not true. That's just a damned outright lie, Grandpa said. Grandma nodded in agreement. I had never heard my grandfather, who was such a positive man, ever raise his voice or cuss. I almost started crying. Then Karen spoke up. One day when I was walking home from school, I went by a house where some people were moving, and there was a pile of stuff by the sidewalk. In the pile was a framed picture of Jesus. He looked so sad and lonely lying there in the pile, so I brought him back home with me. But Marty saw the picture in the house and got really mad at me and took the picture and told me to never bring a picture of him in the house again. Everyone was silent at the table. My little sister didn't realize the tension that she was furthering. I had wanted to tell my grandpa that I was learning Hebrew and Jewish history and all about the synagogue, but I didn't want to upset him any further. I was the only non-Jewish kid I'd ever seen at the Jewish Center or at the synagogue. I had a crew cut and blue eyes and stuck out like a sore thumb in the sea of dark-haired, mostly brown-eyed kids. I felt self-conscious a lot of the time. They often joked about the Goyim, but there was no way they meant me. I was doing this Judaism thing 100%. People in the synagogue sometimes looked at me, not like grown-ups giving a passing glance at some little kid, but more out of curiosity. Who is this boy, and how did he get in here? It didn't help that I was always trying to hold my yarmulke on my head as I walked, or worse, chasing it down the sidewalk when it blew off. I tried to keep a positive attitude about it all. My mantra was, if you're not born a Jew, you just have to work twice as hard at it. One afternoon, I came home from my Hebrew school classes and could barely contain myself. A bar mitzvah! I want to be bar mitzvahed, I announced to Mom and Marty at dinner time. Though my mom seemed nonplussed, Marty was all for it. Since Bubby was the final word on all familial matters, Marty called her after dinner. Ma, Drew, he wants to get a bar mitzvah. Yeah. Well, I think it's a good idea. What? Yeah. Well, so what? So what do you think? Why make it like it's the end of the world? He hung up. My mom said she didn't seem like it was a priority, did she? You know my mom. She's conservative, from the old country. She'll be fine. He turned to me. Don't you worry. You'll get your bar mitzvah. This was a huge deal to me. It solved so much at once. First and foremost, I would finally fit in. I'd no longer be an outsider. And because Marty wanted this for me, I wanted to make him proud of me. But mostly, it would officially make me a man. One day in the fall of '65, Marty asked if I wanted to go outside and throw the football. Yes, I said, a little surprised because he wasn't the athletic type, though I'd seen him throw a football once, and he could throw it really far. We went out to the large field behind our house, along the back side of the neighborhood houses. Okay, run out for a pass, Marty said, peering into the sun across the long field. I ran out and turned. No, farther, he called, motioning out with his free hand. I ran farther and stopped, but Marty motioned me on again. No, keep going. I was almost to the other side of the field. He was very small in the distance, and I was a little worried I wouldn't even see the ball, or that it would hurt when I caught it coming from so far away. Marty cupped his hand to his mouth and yelled, "Are you ready?" "Ready," I yelled back, watching him intently. If I could catch a football at this distance, he'd be impressed, and so would whoever was looking out their back windows. Marty cocked his arm and leaned his body back like he was going to throw a Hail Mary. Suddenly, he straightened back up, cupped his hand to his mouth, and yelled, "Sucker!" Then he dropped the ball, turned, and walked back into the house. For a moment, I just stood there, uncomprehending. I looked at the back door, thinking that maybe he'd returned, that he was just kidding with me. After 5 minutes, I realized that was the joke. I was the joke. I walked the length of that field, back to the house where Marty was already asleep on the couch, snoring, a drink in his hand. I had no idea why he'd done that to me. My mom and he had been arguing a lot lately, but that didn't have anything to do with me. 2 weeks later, he talked me into going out again to toss the football, telling me, "This time I'll throw it. I promise." Again, I ran way out, and he did the same thing. I didn't know whether to hate him for doing it or myself for falling for it. Fall turned to winter, and I continued my Hebrew lessons and bar mitzvah classes at the center, prerequisites for any bar mitzvah candidate. It was odd seeing 12-year-olds in yarmulkes walking down the hall conversing in Hebrew. A little more than a year from now, I'd be 13. My bar mitzvah would change everything and everyone's view of me. I couldn't wait. A few months later, I started hearing the fights between my mom and Marty. Usually they were in the evening behind the closed door to their bedroom. But one night, the four of us, Mom, Karen, Marty, and I, were sitting at the table having dinner. Suddenly, Marty, who was having words with Mom, slammed his hand down on the table and his heavy wedding ring shattered a dinner plate. He cut his fingers on the edge and blood sprayed over his steak. The red meat of his cut hand matched the steak, and the sour cream on his baked potato turned a bright pink. He wrapped his hand in a towel and drove himself to the ER for stitches while Karen and I finished eating. Marty must have figured that since us kids had witnessed the dinner table outburst, there was no real reason to keep his voice down any longer. From that point on, when he and Mom fought, they didn't bother waiting until they were behind closed doors. We could hear them arguing and screaming at each other regularly. So could the neighbors. When I wasn't at school, I tried staying focused on my Hebrew lessons. The bar mitzvah was my goal. Maybe it would make Marty proud of me. Maybe he and Mom would stop fighting. I still looked up to Marty. Maybe I even loved him. But picturing him as my dad was starting to look cloudy. He had a mean streak that I'd never seen before, and I was more than a little scared of him. One Saturday, I was down at Alum Creek with my friend Andy trying to build a raft. "Drew, your stepdad's here," Andy whispered, pointing up the road. Oh, shit. I wasn't allowed to be down at the creek, but I never thought anyone would actually come down here checking on me. Yet here was Marty, looking out of place on a gravel road in the woods in his sharkskin suit and sunglasses, a cigarette dangling from his hand. "Drewsy, get back in the house." "Now," Marty said. I knew I was in big trouble. I hated it when he called me Drewsy, which he had started doing lately. It sounded like he was mocking me, which he was. Back in the house, he told me to come into the bedroom. "You were told that you weren't allowed at the creek," Marty said, still looking down at me over the top of his sunglasses. He had a very affected way about him, like he was acting in a movie, and when he spoke, it was usually measured, as if for dramatic effect. "You just don't seem to want to learn, do you, Drewsy?" I started sniveling. He sounded menacing. This was the first time I'd ever been in trouble. Why was he saying it like I was always a problem? Like he'd been waiting a long time to utter this line. He undid his belt slowly and pulled it out of his pants even more slowly, saying again, "You just don't seem to want to learn." I really started crying then, begging him not to. But Marty simply said, "Pull down your pants and turn around." I did, sobbing and holding both hands over my backside. I pleaded with him not to hit me. Then I got 5 or 6 hits with his belt, and it hurt bad. When he stopped, I pulled my pants up and ran off to my room crying. I was upset that I'd done something wrong, that I got caught, and I was humiliated that I'd gotten punished with Marty's belt, especially at the age of 12. My mom had spanked me once or twice for childish wrongdoings, but this was different. It felt like I'd been violated, like what you did to an animal. My mom never said anything about the incident, except, "Well, you know you were not allowed at the creek." It felt like things were falling apart. She seemed to work all the time. Marty got lax about getting me to the Jewish center, and I was often late or missed my bar mitzvah lessons. When he and I went over to Bubby and Zadie's house, it felt like they were treating me less like a grandson and more like a guest, and the way Marty introduced me changed. "Marty, so who's this little guy you have with you?" a friend of his would ask. The year before, Marty would have said, "This is my son, Drew." But his reply now became, "Oh, this is my wife's boy." One Sabbath day, I was sitting in shul, looking around in the synagogue at all the men praying devoutly. I found myself rocking along with them, trying to keep up with the prayers. Suddenly, I felt like a fool. I was sure they knew I was just mimicking them, that I could take all the Hebrew lessons in the world, but I was never going to be one of the chosen people. I was getting all the persecution, but none of the benefits of being Jewish. Sometime in early 1966, I think, Marty started hitting my mom. They'd have horrible fights in their bedroom at night. I lay in bed and listened to Marty calling my mother all kinds of vile names, then scuffling, my mom crying out. The first time I heard them, I cried and put the pillow over my head. The second time, I wished that I was already a man. I'd rush into their bedroom, beat up Marty, save my mom, and be a hero. But I wasn't a man, and Marty was scary. The end came as abruptly as it had started, with one sentence. In March of '66, our mother came into the bedroom in the middle of the night and woke my sister and me up. She had us get dressed and pack our suitcases in a couple of boxes, which we loaded into the car trunk and drove off in a hurry. Though Karen seemed confused about what was going on, I knew. This was like the Jews running from the slavery of the Pharaoh and fleeing Egypt, except that we were getting the hell out of Columbus and away from Marty. The three of us rode in the car for a long time and said nothing. I finally blurted out, "Mom, what about my bar mitzvah? It's less than a year away." "It doesn't matter," she said. "We're not Jewish anymore."